And we are live. Yes, but you're muted again.
Okay, hi, hello. Welcome to another edition of the DiEM25 TV. My name is Saša Savanović, and today our topic is the technological aspect of the coronavirus crisis. Why the technological aspect? We've seen in the last weeks and months unprecedented usage of surveillance and monitoring technologies and data extraction and exploitation. We have also seen privacy laws being suspended indefinitely, and in recent days also very worrying developments that governments are considering collaborating with very murky, so to say, surveillance companies. So today with us is Renata Ávila, international human rights lawyer and digital rights advocate. She is currently the executive director of the Intelligent Citizenship Foundation based in Chile and Brazil. She is also on the board of directors of the I'm sorry, of the Creative Commons, and of course she's the member of the coordinating collective of DiEM. So welcome, Renata, and hope you can help us understand what's happening with the technological aspect of the crisis and what are the implications of these developments. Hi.
Hi. How are you tonight? I mean, it has been so long no see. I mean, I know that for those who are viewing all the series of DiEM25 TV, last night it was a little bit of chaos, and I apologize if it was a little bit confusing. But I think that tonight's conversation connects very well with the conversation that we had with Slavoj Žižek. If you missed it, you can see it on our YouTube channel. Because we were starting to touch one of the very worrying topics of our time, and as you were saying, we are seeing an unprecedented invasion of technology of every aspect of our lives, and we have to be like here. Like I want to be very careful on how to frame it, because this connection. And this connection with everybody watching this wouldn't be possible without all the level of collaboration and also market forces and all the infrastructure supporting this ability to be connected. I mean, you are in different country, I'm in different country, and we are able to communicate powerful ideas precisely against those companies hosting us and their business model via these means. But it also, I mean, we shouldn't take that lightly, because something that we are missing here, the picture that we are missing here, is the following. Most of the things we are depending on all our lives and the classes of the children and the normality and also the exceptional measures taken by countries are dependent on two jurisdictions, China and the US. I mean, most of the things that are supporting not only, and it's no longer, it's not longer like the internet and digital. It's no longer just a way of communicate. It's a way of doing everything from the deliveries to schooling to fundamental actions that were like reserved to police before. And that is the alarming sound that is sounding in my ears since this crisis started, because like before, like I don't know, with the past Black Death and all of these very tragic situations that affected humanity, and also in Latin America, like you will do sacrifices to the gods, you will pray, you will do like a lot of looking at God for solutions and for mercy or for something to make it stop, with faith, not with logic, but with faith. And it seems to me that the same faith that before we had in God, now we have in these tech companies to find a magic solution that will solve everything, instead of leaving it in the hands not of multiple institutions. Many are arguing that by strict surveillance measures enforced by technology and by a magic app in your hand, we will be able to get out of this crisis. That's what worries me, this blind faith in apps and drones and platforms to solve far more complex social problems.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for bringing up so many topics all at once. Let's start with maybe the first one, what you've mentioned, us using the technologies, and we are now using them as well, like Zoom and YouTube as well. So we are relying on huge platforms that are huge capitalist platforms to communicate, and now more than ever, because millions of people are confined to their homes, those who can afford it, so to say, or those who are privileged enough to be able to communicate this way, are in a way completely dependent on these platforms for every aspect of their lives. So we are using the huge digital giants to communicate. We are using them to order our food. We are using them to get in touch with the reality outside. So we are practically, we don't have a choice, basically. So can we at all talk about digital sovereignty in this type of situation, and what is the path towards a sort of digital sovereignty that is currently completely missing?
I think that what you mentioned is really important, and we like to touch it, but I will go to even further, to a very radical aspect of technology sovereignty, that where I can see all the work that we did, like, the last 20 years, all the nightmares that we had before converging. And I want that technology doesn't happen alone. It happens in combination with lots of things that are growing in society. And one of the things, very, very, very growing things in society, is the way that global trade is configured, and the strict rules that, we in the last 20 years paved the way for a system that punishes citizen innovation, a system that punishes technology sovereignty because of the market, because we wanted to preserve certain markets for certain actors, like they lobbied the way for patents, for very strict, stupid patents that tied our hands for finding solutions. Let me put you an example. How expensive medical equipment is, and how important, how relevant to save the life of people everywhere in Europe and everywhere around the world it is. We have a problem. We have a problem of ventilators. We have a problem of basic equipment. We have a problem of equipment. But we have the solution in our hand. And right now it started in Barcelona and in other cities in Spain and in other places in these labs, in these maker spaces where they have these 3D printers. Very creative people, very innovative citizens, committed and with the ability to provide their own solutions to the community desperate and needing it, started printing. I think that it started in Italy, and then lots of innovation to find a do-it-yourself model of a ventilator that will serve and save someone's life by the citizens, not for profit, and very logical action. The new civics of the 21st century. You have a 3D printer, you have a brain, you got a good education, you collaborate to save lives of people. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful to see it happening, and magical somehow. But what happens? These people face and were threatened with lawsuits. They were threatened to with legal actions against them. And the same will happen the first moment that we find, like, a very effective and cheap way to test COVID-19. Patents and big pharma will quickly produce a takeover, which is not divorced from the privatization and commodification of health and the privatization and commodification of innovation. And so if we reflect, now we are seeing the crude reality of privatizing public goods. And it is very tangible. And to me, it's very, very, it really elevates the alarm, and it really marks the way. We have now clear goals as citizens, some living in Europe, some living in other countries, but Europe has a key role. Europe being, harm to the heart with all these lives lost because of austerity and because of a combination of factors. We need to fix this now, and this is the opportunity to fix it. How colonized is Europe that is impeding that the power of innovation that is in their citizens, and the willingness of citizens to help their people is not supported, and is not celebrated, but is threatened.
Yes, let's return maybe for a second to the surveillance and the data issue, the private data issue. So we've seen in Europe that the only, so to say, talked about problem is when we mention China, and then we say, oh, Chinese, the social credit system, and so on, and this is a very big problem. The government is monitoring citizens, and so on. But at the same time, we are totally not aware, or we are seeing it as so to say, an unpleasant but necessary aspect of the technology we are using, that we are also monitored and surveilled, and that the governments can, as we are seeing now, can also use this data, or ask for them, mobilize them when they feel that this is necessary. So in this respect, today, maybe this is necessary, but we are also not quite sure about how long these measures are going to take, and if they are ever going to end. I mean, I've seen, for example, in Israel, the NSO group being commissioned by the Israeli government to devise a system where people will be, so to say, how to say this, like they will have scores from 1 to 10 that will like number their susceptibility to the virus, or their so isn't this also a sort of social credit system in a way, and this frightening path of combining, as you said, of combining various types of data, so not only geolocation data, but also health data, also perhaps different other types of data. What is the consequences, the consequence of all these developments?
That's another of the lessons, and I have this guy. I want to remind everybody of Edward Snowden's revelations. What is impressive to me, and that no one has mentioned, or maybe someone has mentioned, but it's such information overload that is really, really hard to follow up, is like, 2013, long time ago, 7 years ago, Edward Snowden revealed to us the very sophisticated surveillance and control system that the US had. The NSA is now probably 7 times more powerful than at that time. And Europe was also free riding on that information. So when this insistence of getting our data, I mean, I'm not clear, and I don't want to speculate because I don't have information, but What I know is the capacity, the installed capacity that back in 2013, the NSA had over the data, not only of US citizens, of citizens all over the world, data that could have, that was being used for diplomatic purposes, for economic purposes, and for a variety of purposes. I do not believe for a second that they are not using that ability to surveil and to monitor people right now. I do not believe it for a second, which makes me even more angry because you have seen the speed really slow and the incompetence of the governmental response to this. And now you have a new actor stepping in. You know, you have desperate people demanding the delivery of health services of quality free of charge from their governments, and you have these and the incompetence to deliver it from the governments and the blaming on citizens. That's the dynamic that we are seeing. We have that they have the probably the data that they need to stop the thing, that they had the data from long time ago, that they have the ability to massively surveil on us, that those powers were not limited after the Snowden Revelations, they were not limited, at least in Europe. On the contrary, many of the national security agencies validated many of the actions that they were doing and the sharing of data that we're doing with the US with passing new legal reforms. So, and now we have this, I see this, again, this magic thing saying, okay, they want yet another validation for the private sector to step in and to get hold of our data. And it is on this race, because with the GDPR, and again, is my take on this, and it might be maybe I'm thinking too, I'm being not nice at thinking bad, but maybe when you think the worst possible scenario, so many times is the correct one. My sense is it was very hard, Europe and especially Germany embrace privacy. And they understand the importance of privacy because of history. And this is a historical opportunity to relax that attitude towards privacy, because of course, they said health issues are very important, and health is your life, and we want to protect your life and we want to keep you safe. That's the justification to undermine this right. And it's the perfect justification when there's a data race going on between US and China, where Europe has been left behind, And so what I think here, is deliberate. And I think that the problem is, I will love that my personal data during an emergency with a proportionate and reasonable attitude of public health authorities will contribute to save the lives of people. Of course, I will volunteer and give it away, but we have a problem because those first trust has been eroded and was never restored. Trust in the governments that were further allowing massive breaches of privacy happening and a massive sharing of data, sensitive data with the US, that was left in total impunity. Trust was not restored between citizens and the governments, and trust was never restored between Silicon Valley and those using the services. So the problem is, and again, the same way I blame many of the current health crisis on privatization and the free trade agreements that undermine the public interest, the same way I blame the reluctance of citizens to share their data on the failure of governments and the failure of companies to restore trust. And the GDPR is not enough. And now is that I'm sorry, maybe I'm not letting you speak and I'm behaving like Slavish a little bit.
No, that's
I want to finish the point. My point is, and it's a valid point, with the GDPR, there are many exceptions. And exceptions, I like exceptions when the exceptions are about a right that you want to preserve and make stronger. I like very narrow exceptions when the exceptions are about a right that you want to maximize. I want them as as broad as possible. But in this case, the very narrow exceptions, very, very narrow, there's a group of people, companies, wanting massive sensitive data, trying to expand them. And this is the moment when we need to fight back, and we need evidence. And we need, and the most important fight in here, together with evidence, with very hard evidence on the effectiveness and on no alternative way to preserve our health, will be, together with evidence, the ability of citizens to be actors involved in the things that are going on. It cannot be only companies and government. And they need to open the black boxes, because this data is not, it's not spreadsheets. It is feeding algorithms that will decide on rights, on right to go back to work, on right to go back to school. And it is too important to be left in the hands of a company that refuses to open the algorithm box and that refuses the ability of citizens to hold them accountable.
Yes, I also think that this right to also move is one of these rights that's going to be influenced. We've already seen, like, this happened slightly before the corona crisis began here in Europe, that one of the guys of forensic architecture was denied entry to the US because the algorithm decided so. And this reminded me of, there was a lecture performance here in Vienna of the Belgian artist Thomas Belling, who was long time researching European movement management. I don't know how do they call it. I think it's like something like that. And then he says how they use like Frontex uses, he was reading a lot of Frontex documents, and then he said how they use the term data subjects for people who are trying to enter, of course, the union. And in some document that he read, like he quoted that it's allowed to use force to get the necessary data from these data subjects. What I found interesting is that the GDPR is using the same terminology, data subjects. So I'm wondering when is this going to happen, when data subject is not the one who's like protected, like whose data are protected, but also those that are that can be forced to give up their data because this is a necessary, and forced to give up, and who will we give them to, and what will they do with these data? This is the serious question, and especially since we are always somehow in between these two. We have governments that we do not really trust, and then on the other hand we have private companies that also or of course their interest is not a public interest, but they pursue profit. So this third option of civic ownership of the infrastructure or of data, how is this possible to achieve, let's say?
First, I want to refer to what you mentioned of the data subjects and these double standards and what's going on. And it's very interesting now with the COVID crisis, going back to the main topic of our thing and the connection with digital colonialism, because people will be forced to be involved in a massive new system, forced. There's no opt-out, it's public health. We are in a catastrophe. We are in an emergency. New rules apply. Mandatory rules to all the people in a territory apply. And the infected subjects, now, they have to provide the data. They're forced to give data away of things that are not, that you cannot, your body temperature, like your things, habits as going and buying acetaminophen is very you're like even companies can be forced to give away data data of your what you're buying, where are you going to, and not only of you but also of your network. And it is this chase of high quality data also worries me a lot. And I'm sorry, I'm diverting a little bit of the main topic, but I think that is important. And sometimes, like, and I read Privacy International is doing an excellent job in collecting all the samples of all these exceptional measures here in Europe and around the world. And one of the things that it was very interesting to me was to say that many of these systems are you can opt out. You are free to choose to be involved. But we need to understand something important, and it is the day after COVID, or the transition to after COVID. And that will mean sometimes your so-called freedom is not such a thing. If you are forced, I mean, you can opt not to go to your precarious job, but maybe the gig companies will demand that you show, as in China, that you get enrolled in a voluntary system of testing, and that you get enrolled in a voluntary system of geolocation. And based on your test, and based on the test of your families and the geolocation, whether you live in a hotspot or not, you're allowed to go back to work. And you are allowed to go back to earning a living, And I know that in some countries, workers, and especially freelance workers and gig economy workers under 0-hour contracts are getting a subsidy. But in some countries, they are not. And there's a layer of non-legality, of informality of work that is the most precarious. That is the one, not those who are not in a system, who will be really forced to do that. And that's what worries me the most of that day after, because great, like finally those people who you couldn't chase, that were like navigating your beautiful European country, and so free riding as a right-wing claims, instead of realizing all the services that they provide, free riding on the system and the social system. Then if you are forced to install an app to go back to work, you are traceable. They can measure you, they can geolocate you, they can deport you. That's not new. That was already functioning, and 3 companies profiting the most out of this. And the 3 companies taking the full advantage of all of this here in Europe, of course, Microsoft, Amazon, and Palantir. Of course, Google also is involved, but Palantir, it really, 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 they seize this opportunity, and they're already pushing themselves in providing these surveillance systems to Europe. And the dangerous thing is that Peter Thiel, the person in charge of this company, is buddy of Donald Trump, and is already providing many of the technologies to brutalize and to deport. Is ICE the authority in charge of the deportations, massive deportations of Central American families, all provided by Palantir. Yes. And so it's a very unethical company, and I can see that it will become key, if allowed, to key partner, not only during COVID, yes, and then they will arrive to stay and to enforce this new infrastructure of control and repression of the most vulnerable in society.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I will just read a question also that we get from people watching. One is about the political will to change the system of mass privatization, or to reverse it now. in respect to COVID. However, even though we would expect something like this, because this is a logical thing to see the failures of the privatized social healthcare systems, and the logical thing would be to like see some goodwill to reverse this trend. However, we are seeing exactly the opposite. The same companies that you've mentioned, so Palantir, Amazon, and Microsoft, have already started working with the NHS in England, in the UK, on curiously very on developing a system that would secure the reliable allocation of resources, of very scarce resources. So not even that the public health infrastructure was destroyed. Now we take these very murky companies, tech companies, that will provide us with a system of logistics for the public sector. So we are basically seeing another level of privatization, another attempted privatization, that even logistics of these sectors are now being privatized. So I'm afraid that that not the reverse trend will happen, but the intensification of the neoliberal one. What do you think, Renata?
I agree with you, and I think that that's why infrastructures that like the one that we are building in DiEM are very, very important. And that's why lots of DiEM volunteers co-wrote, like lots of people in a collaborative way, co-wrote a tech pillar with the solutions to fight precisely against the system that you're describing. And the interesting thing about DiEM is that it is our tech solutions are not tech solutionism, are integrated with a pillar on economy and the European Green New Deal, integrated with a migration policy. Because it all goes together, and this COVID crisis is showing us it is not only a matter of when you have the political will and when you really care about the well-being of your people, all of this goes hand in hand. Portugal did a very, very good thing, I think, when legalizing, at least temporarily, all the people in the country to incorporate them, because they know that you cannot have two standards of citizens, two classes of citizens, if you need to address a pandemic. Similarly, I think that we need to integrate, like technology cannot be this isolated thing. We need to realize, and now is the moment that we are realizing that data is a key infrastructure. Countries need to have control on the data, and especially the data, the sensitive data of their citizens, but to the benefit of citizens, not only in a company that is based in a country like that is across the ocean. And I think that this is the opportunity really to push back, and it needs to be done through politics at the local level, at the national level, and the pan-European level to reverse this trend and push for a data model that increases privacy and agency of citizens, that is open source, and that is rights preserving. And I think that this is a perfect opportunity also to get it funded. Why are we paying to Palantir? Why taxpayers from Europe, they already pay a lot for public education, universities, all the funding that goes to universities, all the funding going to research centers, all, and now paying to a company in the US to develop solutions that will be developed by the community and in collaboration with citizens, especially with all the people who will be like out of job, really qualified people. Why this approach of getting these giants, getting the data and the very sensitive data, European citizens, feeding the algorithms of the already powerful companies of the US that will eat the market of the European citizens again? I mean, it's like Pac-Man, it's predatory, it's exploitation, it's extractivism, and it's extractivism here in Europe. And that, I think that Europe has a tremendous responsibility, because it's the region that could do the things differently. Do you think that the poor people that are not now facing this pandemic in India, in Brazil, in Thailand, I don't know, you name it, will have the power and the opportunity and the choice and the luxury of opening, like, you know, these beautiful labs full of 3D printers to provide solutions? No, you need the opportunity that Europe has here is highly educated people, a very strong rights frame, well-funded universities, and a problem that they can solve together. And I don't mean about leaving the private sector outside. No, the private sector is fundamental, but a private sector addressing a catastrophe needs to be a sector not focused on profit. It needs to be focused on on human principles, you know, on people first and serving the country. I mean, if we embrace European values.
And how is this current situation? How can we, from this point on, we have also seen of course, the planning for for introducing the 5G networks together with this entire smart cities and Internet of Things perspective, which is, of course, again pursued by the most the big giant tech companies. And how is this going to also like translate into surveillance of our lives and our freedom?
I think that it is on this 5G, you know, 5G technology. I think that we need to look at that right now at the European level at priorities. We have been like working from home, and many of us from cities, others from rural areas. And the finding of many people across Europe is that internet, even in like, you know, OECD countries, is crap when you are in an isolated area. Like not even the, you know, broadband for all in Europe is resilient enough to deal with this crisis. And that's a big thing to realize and a big reflection. And it's not cheap, you know, like it's not cheap. It's lots of people like are left out, and lots of people are being excluded. And skills, the myth of skills and fully skilled Europeans to deal with this fast track massive transition to be doing everything online is not as such. And there are many people left out. And so if I was in charge of these topics at the European Commission, I will reprioritize and I will like freeze for a while the 5G thing, because it's very expensive, it's very exclusive, not to mention, not to even touch the privacy thing, as at the level of infrastructure is extremely expensive. Can Europe really afford that massive investment in that technology that is only going to serve urban areas? Because it's only going to serve urban areas. It's going to be exclusive to urban areas. That is not going to, I mean, it's not improving the communications between people, but communications between things. And it's going to bring yet another set of regulatory problems that maybe are not in the right now priorities of the union. I think that we have seen deficient health infrastructure, precarious services, dependence on bloody Amazon to deliver basic goods, and complete lack of investment on green transport, like absolute dependence on airplanes. We have like a long list of priorities and a long list of issues to be addressed before 5G. I think that That's a personal opinion, but I think that it is really a moment of reflection of Europe, of rethinking the priorities and rethinking the basics. The basic is taking back the control of sensitive data and establishing a real democratic governance model for it, where citizens are part of it, opening the black boxes if they want us to believe in magic apps and magic solutions to solve the health crisis, the security crisis, and all the crises, because we cannot audit the algorithm and we cannot make sure that the rights are respected on it. And investment, like massive, we saw the miracle with the little investment in digital social innovation that the union has. The magic of these beautiful groups of citizens, very quick, in matter of days, providing solutions to really pressing situations such as the lack of medical equipment. Imagine with the right amount of funding, instead of funding, 5G to either a Chinese or a US company to deploy lots of pretty much useless to the average citizen boxes everywhere. Imagine if that money was allocated in communities of volunteers. It's very funny because I read this headline at the Financial Times that Amazon is the new Red Cross. And it really, I really want to, I feel the need to touch it, because the Red Cross is an institution that I have to the highest regard, because it's an institution of 95, almost 100 million volunteers, and founded to protect human rights, to protect human life, to protect health, and to alleviate human suffering. How can we compare a predatory company extracting our data and destroying the local businesses and the local life, and treating their workers as, as not even as that data subjects, like as objects, disposable objects, with this mission to deliver things that we don't want on record time and destroying the planet? How can we compare it to the Red Cross? So I think that local resilience needs investment, and trust in the technology that we use needs democratic processes and citizen involvement and transparency and accountability. Without that, we could be this crisis will be much better at this point. It will still be there, but the society in Europe had the chance to be more resilient to it, and it wasn't. We lost an opportunity of 2 decades on funding properly digital social innovation. We lost a big opportunity giving up all the sovereignty to free trade agreements that only benefited China and Silicon Valley. And we lost the opportunity to restore, with the Snowden Revelations, to restore trust and really lock the possibility of backdoors and even front doors for the US and to extract the sensitive data of citizens. And so under the excuse of national security. So we need to rethink the model. And I think that Europe has the possibility to do it now, has suffered a lot again. And I hope that this pain is not in vain. And I really hope that all the proposals that we pushed forward as DiEM, and all the proposals that many rights groups and many maker groups and maybe many free software groups are pushing right now, are listened to.
When you've mentioned the digital divide now, speaking about the rural areas being left behind with this 5G conundrum, how to say. So there's also one question about this, and I think it's very important. How can DiEM, for example, or any kind of progressive, let's say, movement get to the people in rural areas, because they are left behind, even in this sense that they don't have the infrastructure to participate. So what about these proposals that we've seen last year coming from the UK, from the Labour Party, about the public broadband, and also what are the other different communal or commons-based technological solutions that we would like to see in practice, and how to start working on them.
I love municipalities. Local governments are my favorite thing right now. And I think that there's this emerging coalition, Cities for Digital Rights. And we are living under COVID. I wonder whether we could leverage as part of the, lots of subsidies to workers, lots of subsidies to companies. And what about these basic pieces of infrastructure, a massive investment in subsidies to bring broadband to rural areas, but not alone, it's not only connectivity, it's the ability to engage locally. So I think that together with the connectivity, that there has to be an infrastructure of participation and something for the community to be part of and build, and not just to be passive. Great that they will be able to connect to platforms to see movies, but I also think that the rural areas have a lot of potential for remote work, for high quality lives, for many of the things that we want to see in a green Europe. And maybe not necessarily big cities are the only answer, and just green transport and that kind of things is really important, but you cannot it cannot be an appealing thing for young people to live in rural areas if you don't have good connectivity. So I think that it's a basic infrastructure. And also data, I think that we need to start considering and really pushing for the narrative that data is a basic infrastructure and that good custodian of such data is the local community. I was watching before joining this beautiful exchange, how very basic data is really helping people to analyze this and to build models of artificial intelligence to help some basic data as how of the check-ins and check-outs from rural hospitals, which is data usually neglected and disconnected from the big data from the cities. But what if that very precious data is only controlled by Google, for example, only controlled by these companies providing the data infrastructure? How come we lost control of such basic asset to take public decisions? I think that data, and especially this data about our citizens and about key topics like health, is a key infrastructure of a good democratic governance of tomorrow, and we need to take it back. It should be at the top list of our priorities, not 5G. 5G we can forget about a couple of years. And the Americans and the Chinese solve their,
another question is, how can we build resistance against digital colonialism? One is first comes to mind the question if recently a friend was in China, and then he told me, oh, all the people there are using VPN, or it's the part of the normal basic digital hygiene. So is it I suppose this is not really the case. Those are probably just middle classes and educated people, technologically literate people. But is this something that we should also start doing in Europe as well? So VPN as the most basic digital hygiene, and then what's the next step as well?
I think that first of all, it's important to understand how technology works. Second, once you understand how technology works, you have to understand the economy of the technology behind and this data extractivism, and how now imagine if someone is really happy about the COVID crisis, it's big tech companies. We are using them and training their algorithms all day and night, working from home, and you intensively using it as not only for our working time, but everybody is glued to screens since it started. We need to realize that. We need to realize how much of our life is into a screen and not outside the screen, and who is benefiting from it, and analyze our choices. But it's not only a thing. I believe, like, like in this realization, but not to change habits and say, oh, I will limit my screen time to 2 hours, but to understand that technology is politics, and that to address the situation that we are right now is not like saying, oh, I will not use technology anymore, is to push for the political changes that would enable and open the funding and open the political will and the multi-sector will to build the technology we want, a technology based on a different economic model. Because at the end of the day, is the technopolitical model of massive surveillance, massive control of people, and prediction of people, and therefore control of the future actions of people, is very tempting to superpowers, and it leaves us like in a really vulnerable position. And that's the model that we need to resist. And for that, we need alternatives, but not only alternatives. It's not only like, we are going to build the European Google, or we are going to build the DiEM Zoom. We need technologies that that help our lives to be better and the connections to be smoother. But we need also a new way of funding it, so it doesn't have to be like on data that will feed the algorithms of a for-profit company that's not ours. I think that algorithms are fantastic and can achieve big things, like a good model with good data can improve the lives of people. But right now, first, we need to generate the ecosystem to bring those companies to life. And then I think that with these 3 components that I mentioned before, that Francesca Bria, who's a great innovator in this space, mentions often, technology increasing privacy and security, open source, and rights preserving. If we combine these 3 ingredients, and public funded and non-extractive, I think that it can lead to a different model of society. And it not only applies to technology; it applies to everything. I think that yes, we have a big opportunity to start a new way of configuring things.
In terms of like basic like digital colonialism, so to say, like the big tech companies extracting the value of very local economies. So extracting the taxi rides, extracting the food delivery, extracting from, so very local things, extracting from I don't know, any sort of deliveries. So things that the very local economy that is happening basically from street to street, but the huge company, Silicon Valley company, is benefiting. So is like getting the surplus value of this exchanges. How to make these economies local again? So do we, is the recipe the same? So fund different, so to say, competitive solutions that are community-based, that are cooperatively owned, that are publicly funded, or how to, I mean, we have these big companies already in place. So how to, I mean, how to get them out? They are convenient, people like them, but we also know a lot of troubles that they are making with their models for workers, the precariousness of work. So, yeah.
I have a very, very punctual response about it. Like, have you seen how all the response of this crisis, especially in the US, but in many parts of Europe as well, is the economy above all, the economy above the lives of elderly people, the economy above health concerns, the economy. That's at the top of everything, you know, like about solidarity, about common sense even. And these large scale interventions imposed on people like curfews. I had an experience, a very interesting experience in Chile, like last year, because people demanding a better, like education system, transport system, better rights, basically, and a big push against austerity. After social unrest, there was a curfew. We were under military rule with like, you know, soldiers in the street, and we were like the curfew. You couldn't go out after 6 p.m. from your house, and you couldn't go to work. It was horrible. It was really horrible. And what happened was very interesting, because it was a way, by being confined to your building and to your neighborhood and with limited hours, and this sense of the local solidarity was reborn. And we were not like buying the stuff or going to the shops of the oppressor, of the companies backing the government in this brutalization of society. And I think that the same can happen now. I think that we need first, in the countries that where unions are strong, we need to support the unions, and it's an excellent opportunity to organize the tech workers and to invite the tech workers to expose these abuses. Second, we need to look at the people near us and how this crisis has impacted them. That, you know, buying the local produce, realizing that, oh, you know, the shop from that chain fired all the employees in this very critical moment. Do you want really to keep supporting them, or do you want a different model? And after it's going to be horrible, like economically speaking. It's going to be like lots of empty pockets and empty stomachs all over the world after this crisis, after COVID. And I think that that's the moment to think, when everybody has a lot of time to think, which is now, and with lots of people will be like with no jobs, is an excellent opportunity to think of forms of collaboration and mutual support, and getting the community thread back together. I know that it sounds really, really, really kitsch, but I think there is a big opportunity. I think that these companies, I mean, honestly, if you're watching this, realize you're paying twice for it. You're paying with your data and your behavioral data all day long, and you're paying services. I mean, we pay many of the services of these companies. We pay them one way or another, and we pay them also watching all the advertising that comes on many of the platforms. We pay them with time, and life is made out of time, and you know, like we pay big price, and they do not even pay taxes. Do you think that if these companies were like paying their taxes in these countries, I mean, maybe we will have better hospitals. Maybe the nurses will be better paid. I mean, that's very simplistic, but it's just a reflection. Do we want to go back to things as normal after this? Do we want to allow that they pretend to be like the saviors of our normality, that they keep profiting out of us, and they keep like running like without any obstacle, all key infrastructure to communicate and continue our jobs, exploiting the data of the children? I think that there's big questions to be made, and I think that we need a big push for local alternatives and community-based alternatives, especially in sensitive issues such as remote education. You know, like the data of children training the algorithms of US companies is horrific.
Yeah, there was a question also, like probably goes with this one, but we are slowly running out of time, so be quick, even though it's a hard question. So it's about the far right trying to capitalize on this crisis. We've seen, of course, borders closing across the globe. This is maybe like one of these aspects, but what do you think will be, is it possible to deter, how to say, this trend of going back, of returning to the national state, and to motivate a different sort of mobilization?
It is possible, and this is precisely what we are doing now and what I was suggesting. For example, all the gig workers. The interesting thing of these platforms is that there are like common trends, and they're present in each and every European citizen. Think of Airbnb, think of Uber, think of this platform that we are using, that we are no longer going to use, hopefully soon. I think that this, the ability to show the example that it is a problem larger than the national state and can only be addressed as a bloc, as the European bloc, is an excellent opportunity. But the problem is that the far right has a very, very strong negative agenda, borders, and so we need to revert it with a positive agenda. We have it at DiEM. We have it in the pillars. We need to translate these things that we want, the future that we want. We need to start like communicating it well. That's why DiEM25 is very useful, to start like sharing our ideas, what we stand for, now that the people are, have time to think and time to be at home, and start translating it into actions, into campaigns, into interventions. So the next time that we have elections anywhere in Europe, this is the program that people demand. And I think that when you suffer a human loss or a loss of job or something that was very precious to you, like your freedom to go walk in the street, you're especially receptive and sensitive to people who can, with compassion and solidarity, listen to you and propose a way on how things could have been different. And we are living precisely that time. And if we do not seize each and every minute of that to make a difference and to increase our numbers, then what the person sharing the question was afraid of will happen. But if we seize the moment, we will become stronger, and our agenda is going to be the common agenda of Europe.
Thanks, Renata. For the end, just also people are asking, what is the title of the book that you've shown in the beginning? And also the orange one behind you with, again, Snowden and I think Manning on it.
The one is by one excellent book by Dieter Dieser, Roth, and Annegret Falter called Whistleblowers in Security Politics. It's excellent and is very, very current, especially because all the directives of whistleblowing are being implemented in the European Union now. Very good. And the other is Permanent Record, which is the memoirs of Edward Snowden. Highly recommended as well.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you, everybody, for watching and being a part of another DiEM25 edition. And we see each other tomorrow again with Srećko, I think, and Richard Bennett. Yes. Thank you, Renata. Bye-bye.